Well, if you were going to ask someone who's been using Photoshop for some time what one of the most important features is, more than likely they're going to answer layers. Layers is definitely the backbone of a lot of images or any kind of workflow inside Photoshop. In fact, the subject of layers is so complex that a full book has been written on it by my colleague, Matt Kloskowski. You can check that out. He also has a couple of courses specifically catered to layers. And true, it is a very, very complex subject, and we're not going to be able to cover all aspects of layers here in this course, but I just want to cover some of the basics so you get a general idea of how layers work. So we're going to cover that over the next few videos. So layers are basically handled in the Layers panel. As you can see by default, it's gone ahead and showed up inside my document here. I'm just going to drag it out so we can talk about this for a little bit. The Layers panel is where all your files are, or all your layers are managed. And here's where you can apply all various kinds of effects right inside the Layers panel as well. Now notice when you have a document open inside Photoshop, you have the background layer. And the background layer is by default locked, meaning it cannot support any transparency. To unlock a background layer, you simply double click it right on the icon and you will get this window that says you can name the layer. And it's basically going to turn it into a normal transparent layer. Now I say transparent because if you go in here and erase, in fact, let me undo that. Let's go back to the locked layer. If I were to take my erase tool and just start erasing on this document, it's not really erasing, it's actually filling it with my background color swatch here in my toolbar. In fact, just to give you a better idea, if I flip this around and make black my background swatch and do the same erasing, it does that very thing. However, if we were to unlock the layer, like I said, if I double click on it and click OK, and use that same eraser tool, and I start erasing, you'll see the transparent background of my document. If you remember back in the preferences, this is where you can modify the transparency settings. Right now it's just a checkered gray background. But that is how you unlock the background layer. Now, you generate new layers in several ways. You can generate a new layer by perhaps generating a selection. Like, so let's say I wanted to isolate this box to its own layer without the white background. Well, one quick and easy way I like to do it, especially if the object is against a white background like this, is I'll go and grab that Magic Wand tool and just simply click the background, and you can notice it selects that entire area, and I will go into the Select menu here and go to Inverse. And then I'm just going to go under the Layer menu right here, and again, this is where you're going to find all the various layer settings or adjustments that you can do inside here. But in this case, I want to go under the New menu and we're going to do Layer via Copy, or you can use the keyboard shortcut Command J. And when I do that, notice what happens. It generates a new layer, giving it a layer 1, does it in a numerical order. And now, if I turn off the visibility, these icons next to the layers are these little eyeballs are basically how you turn on and off the individual layers. So if I turn off this background layer, you'll notice that now we have that box on its own layer against the transparency. And now I can move this object around on this layer. Now, the highlighted layer is your currently active layer, depending on what layer you're working on, so you can move that object around. If I were selected on this layer and I wanted to move that box, notice nothing happens. It's moving around the object that I can't see. So let's jump over to another image I've got open here. Now, here is an image I generated based on a number of different color fills and frames and shapes and things like that. Looks like a standard flat image, but look at my Layers panel here. You'll notice I've got a considerable number of layers going on in here, all the way from the background layer all the way up to the various parts that make up this image. And I can control each of these elements individually. If I highlight a certain layer and grab my Move tool, you can see I can move that object around. So I'm able to build an image, but still keep all my parts separate by putting them together in a Layers panel. And the way the layers work is, try and imagine yourself at the top of this layer order looking straight down. And that's what you're seeing in the image right here. In fact, to get a better idea, I've taken this very same image and kind of tilted it in a way that you can see how those layers are going. So this very image right here is simply a buildup of all these combined layers. So we're just kind of tilting it and spreading them out just to give you a better idea. So each individual layer is a different item. I've got some shading layers here. Here's my background layer. There's a texture layer. Each of these frame layers, we've got the image, all these elements that make up the light. And then there's a lighting layer here. So all these individual elements combine to make this image that you're looking at right here. So, giving you an idea of how layers work, let's jump into the next lesson and talk about a couple of different aspects of layers as far as layer effects. You'll notice here in the layers panel, there's a number of things going on here. You got some layers that look like the basic layers we were talking about, but there's some additional items in here. In fact, before we go to the next lesson, I do want to talk about one quick thing. You notice some layers have an additional icon here next to them. Now, this is known as a layer mask. Now, again, masking is another incredibly complex subject, but I just wanted to touch on this so you can see what's going on. What this is a way of hiding or revealing certain parts of your layer using a layer mask. And it does that based on 256 levels of gray. Now, anything that's white on this layer, as you can see, is going to be completely visible. And anything black is going to be hiding something. So to give you a better idea, let's go back over to this image here. So there's that box layer that I created. So let's say I wanted to hide a certain aspect of it. Well, I'm going to go down here to the bottom of my layers panel, and you've got a number of icons here, and I'm going to cover a couple of these in the next lesson, but I want to look at this one right here, the third icon. When I click on that, you notice what happens to my layer. It added that third icon there. And it's filled with white, as you can see, revealing everything on this layer. However, if I go over here and grab, let's set the foreground color of my brush to black. I'm going to grab that brush tool, and I'm just going here and I'm just going to start painting. And you'll notice that it appears to be erasing that aspect or that part of my box, when in reality it's actually not. It's actually painting right on that layer mask and temporarily hiding it. So if I hold down my Shift key and click right on that layer mask, you'll notice it gets a red X, which temporarily disables that layer mask, and you'll notice that the box is still there. I haven't erased anything. So it's a non-destructive way of hiding and getting various effects on your images, on your particular layers, without actually erasing them. So if I ever decided I want to go back to that, I don't want to have that box erased, you can simply grab that layer mask itself, drag it to the trash can, and then you just hit delete, and it's gone away. So let's jump back over there and look at these layers. You'll notice there's other aspects of these layers too. They've got an effects icon here, and that's basically something called layer styles, and that is something I want to talk about in the next lesson. So, hope this gives you a basic idea of how layers work. We're going to jump in a little bit deeper in the next lesson and talk about some things you can add to your layers. Oh, one final footnote before we leave this lesson. I want to talk real quick about renaming and throwing away layers inside your layers panel. You'll notice I have a number of these layers, and they're simply numerical, and that's just the default whenever you go and create a new layer. But if you wanted to name a layer for its specific content, you can simply just double-click right on the name itself and give it a new name. And we'll just call this, well, actually, let's go down here and let's select this frame layer. We'll just double-click on that, and we'll call it Frame 1, and you simply press Enter, and it goes ahead and applies the name. Now, there are a couple of ways of deleting layers inside Photoshop. Now, new to Photoshop CS4, if I'm currently highlighted on a specific layer and you simply press the delete key, it will go ahead and delete that layer for you. Before, you weren't able to do that. In order to delete a layer and one way you can still do it is simply taking that layer and dragging it right down to the trash can icon at the bottom of the layers panel, and it will go ahead and throw that layer away as well. So, those are the quick things there. Let's jump into the next lesson and talk a little bit more about layers, shall we?